This is a number 0 record vise. This is a number 6, number 3, and a number 1. Let me introduce you to the family. Number 3 is my vise. Was my vise. It's a modern Irwin-made record. It works fine, no complaints. However, this is where I had it mounted. As you can see, that's inconveniently in the corner of the room. Logic dictates that if I need to drill 3 new holes at the other end of my workbench anyway, obviously I need to replace it with a larger vise. This will be, all going well, my new main vise. Nothing special, a trade me purchase. It looks like it has hardly been used, but the patina is thick. Number 1. This is a special one. This was my grandfather's vise. He's 20 years gone now. I'm not one to get too sentimental about stuff, because I figure the universe will eventually implode, destroying itself and all of our vintage tools with it. In the more near term, I am somewhat attached to this vise, and I will be using it alongside the big one. Hopefully we can clean it up, treat the surface rust, but otherwise leave it as is. And that leaves this guy. What's the point of another small vise? This is a number 0, and I have no use for it. These things sell on Trade Me all day long for about $35, but this one was $30. So, you know, I'm at least going to repaint the big vise, so I may as well do this small one at the same time. Maybe I'll mount it on the front of the Land Rover. I did eventually manage to get 2 of the screws out. The other 2 will have to be drilled out. This is not really how you want to be doing this. Drilling out stuck screws by hand is almost certainly going to wreck the internal threads, which is what happened. No big deal, I have a thread repair kit, which is the wrong size. These English-made record vices use Whitworth screws. It just so happens that 5/16 Whitworth and 5/16 American have the same number of threads per inch, so this will work just fine. I know, the thread profile is different. We're not building a Formula 1 car here, and if we were, we'd be using metric. For an old vise, this will be fine. These thread repair kits are easy to use, but I don't want crooked holes, so I need to make a guide. To the lathe! First, the guide is going to guide the tap drill. And then after a brief modification, it becomes the guide for the tapping. Here is the big number 6, stripped, derusted, and then I left it sitting around for a few weeks until it developed this nice bronze colour. Anyway, as you can see, the rust has gone. Unfortunately, the pitting is a lot more than I'm prepared to live with. So I'm going to attempt to remachine most of the metal surfaces. The hardest part was machining the top face of the slide, because I had to do it in 2 setups. And this shaper doesn't cut perfectly flat, so that involved a lot of faffing about with shims. Unfortunately, this is where I lost a whole bunch of footage. Here's a little bit that I had recorded on my phone. Looks awesome. No! Now, moving on. This is actually back in time. You'll see the big vise still has paint on it. So cleaning, straightforward. This is just a mild alkaline cleaner. The number 0 looks okay. I'm going to repaint this one anyway. But the number 1, I want to just clean it up and try to remove the rust staining without harming the paint. Unfortunately, that's not going to be possible. The original paint is literally washing off. I think the paint probably deteriorated years ago, but because no one has been handling the vise, it hasn't gone anywhere. Until now. And I don't want a bare metal vise. So I'll try to repaint it as close to this colour as possible. Which is not the same as this colour. I don't know if the darker colour on the old vise is correct, or just 70 years worth of soaked in grime. But I don't care. I remember it being a darker shade, so that's what I'm aiming for. Not to get too pedantic, I'm just going to order a standard colour that looks close enough. In this case, sapphire blue. And I'm going to use the same paint for all 3 vices. So that does mean the other 2 will be the wrong colour. But I don't really care so much about those 2, so it doesn't matter. Done. And I think number 1 and 0 look great. But I think this shade of blue on the big vise looks like shit. And this is supposed to be satin, by the way. I'll have to ask my paint guy. I may have laid the coats on a little thick. Anyway, I'm going to see what it looks like all done before I reach for the paint stripper. I also made this, new screws for the number 1 vise, and a few pins. These are pretty simple devices, consisting of a nut, a spring, and a couple of pins. Now, the number 1 grandfather's vise. I don't think I mentioned this, but I did take the jaws off. It was a whole saga, but the footage now resides in the land of format. These are the original jaws going back on, with new screws of the correct size. The reason I took the jaws off, just to put them back on, is because I think I'm going to switch to copper jaws. Not right now, but when I get around to it. And I wanted to do all the wrestling with stuck screws before I repainted the vise. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, I hit a snag. The jaw that came off doesn't fit back on. The holes in the jaw don't line up with the holes in the vise. Obviously it's close enough that a He-Man in the record factory 70 years ago managed to make it fit. At the time this was just like any vise you'd buy in Bunnings today. Who cares? 70 years later, I don't want to risk breaking anything, so it took a little fettling to get back together. These small record vices have a really nice feature. They were finished with the jaws in place. I have a roof, so let's try and replicate that. Nice. Well, nice enough. I'm not going to do this to the number 1. Like I said, I plan to fit copper jaws in the future, so there's no point removing material now. So, the big number 6. This requires 2 more operations. First, I removed material from the top of the slide. I'm going to compensate for that by adding copper shims. Nothing fancy, just super glued in. Secondly, these are American, not Whitworth screws. The 2 repaired threads are this size anyway, and the screws go into the original Whitworth holes just fine. But the heads are a little big. I'm happy with the number 6. The colour isn't perfect, but it'll be covered in scratches, weld splatter and grinding marks soon enough anyway. The number 1 will be mounted on an as yet to be built second workbench. As for the tiny number 0, I decided to give it to my 2-year-old son. He immediately dropped it between his 2 bare feet, and now it has been confiscated by his mother. Thank you all for watching. I'm not really sure what this video was, but some of you may have made it to the end. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.